Welcome back to Viljandi, Estonia, where I am working on some new music while in residence at the Coit Theatre. Special thanks to my Patreons for helping me get this far. It's been an amazing trip. We've seen some amazing things, and it's been a real chance to sit down and work on some music. I wanted to do some very different kinds of patching this time around, so I'm working on something more rhythmic, and it's turning out really, really well. So far, we've looked at the drum sounds, the bass sounds, chordal sounds, and the vocoder sound and the pluck sound. So let's have a listen to how all of this stuff so far works together. So I'm going to bring up the drums, and I'll bring in the bass, and I'll bring in the pluck sound, and I'll bring in the chord sound, and I'll bring in the vocoder. Cha, cha. And there's a little preview of what some of that stuff sounds like. Well, not content with all of that and still having a little bit of room in the case, I thought I would expand on it, and I had really planned all along to have a part of the patch that I could play melodies with. But I wanted to do something really, really wacky, and this is where it starts to get strange. So years ago, when I was but a young lad, the very first electronic instrument I ever bought was a Star Instruments snare, which was a kind of a 2-oscillator, single filter, sweepable, UFO-looking electronic musical instrument that you played like a drum. It had a rubber surface with knobs on the front. I paid a lot of money for it. And it was a fascinating little device, and it was part of what really got me excited about electronic music. I was just a drummer in high school and playing in some local bands and teaching drums, but wanted to get into electronic music. So I bought this crazy thing, and it could even do things like drones and all kinds of exciting things. Well, fast forward several years, several decades actually, and I managed to find that the genius of small, interesting modules, Laddick, had actually started rebuilding these snares. And even more importantly, he recreated the circuitry in tiny little Eurorack modules, and I've got a couple of them here. So what I've got in here, you can't really see what it's doing, but it's the heart of this snare drum synth module. It has a trigger in on the top, and then it gives you some sweep controls. So it basically has a function that when it gets a trigger, it'll instantaneously rise to a high voltage, and then that voltage will sink down depending on how you've got that knob set. So it's some kind of an envelope function. What's cool about it is that the louder that trigger is, the more gain coming off of whatever your trigger source is, and it'll take a whole wide range of triggers, then the louder or the higher the voltage, and it'll probably go up to about 10 volts or so. So it's very, very sensitive to that, just like the original drum was, and Laddick's version of it works very, very well. What's cool about that is that it is actually one of the few velocity-sensitive Eurorack modules I've ever seen. And then it gives you a way of determining how long it takes for that voltage to then drop and decay to zero. The other cool thing about it is that that voltage shoots down into an output that you can plug into other things. But I really just needed the trigger envelope voltage and then the VCA that's built into the bottom. So then you can come out of some sound sources, go into the VCA, come out of the VCA, and that gives you a whole little electronic drum. So I spent a little bit of time testing some of the different pads that I was using when I was a kid and the different triggers. And what I found worked really well is this Roland. It's one of their mini little kind of cymbal drum triggers from their TD drum series. For many, many years, I played a big TD, fully loaded TD kit in a show band in Western Canada, and I've got all kinds of parts and pieces left over. So that worked really, really well with this little drum kit. So I'm going to fire it up, and we'll hear it do something. So what we're listening to as I hit the drum is we're listening to a disting running as an oscillator patched into yet another of my favorite dope for A121 mini filters. You can never have enough of those in a small space, running as a low-pass filter with a little bit of resonance on it, and then coming out of there and going into Lattice VCA. So the trigger voltage that I'm generating, each time I hit that drum, that trigger voltage controls the filter sweep and it controls the built-in VCA, so it gives me a whole little drum sound. But of course I wanted it to really pop, and how could I bring all these modules all the way around the world without running my favorite wave folder? So I'm using the analog wave folder that's your special bonus treat built into the IntelliGel shapeshifter. So I'm running the output of that VCA all the way over here, and then the output of that wave folder is what goes into the blue box. The nice thing about the wave folder is it almost works a little bit like a compressor. This particular Lattice circuit from the original snare drum has tons and tons of very spiky gain on it, so getting it to mix nicely with the rest of the sounds and the pad sounds and everything was a little bit tricky, and the wave folder helps do that, as well as give me that lovely filter into folder rubbery sound that I so love. It's surprisingly sensitive, and of course being fully analog, it literally has no latency at all, so it's a pleasure to play. The disting oscillator can be set to have a wave shaping function. So in this case, if I play quietly, not only do I get a quieter lower voltage peak, but I get more of a square wave sound from my oscillator because I'm running a control voltage into that wave function. Then as I start to hit it harder, then it'll start to wave shape into more like a sawtooth. The next thing that I wanted to be able to do is once I had it set up and running, that was lots of fun. I could see where it would be useful, but why not integrate it with the rest of the melodic content going on in my box? So using a little IntelliGel buffed mult, I come out of the IntelliGel quantizer into the buff mult, and I'm using the other half of my good friend, the dope for sample and hold. So then all I need to do is find some way to derive a trigger from my spiky voltage that comes out of the Lattice snare module, and then use that to control the sample and hold, and then use that sample and hold to grab notes from the quantizer, and I'd be able to get it to play all kinds of different tunes and things. The problem is that the output of that Lattice module is a whole bunch of different ranges. So I can't just use a comparator or something to grab a high voltage, because then it would only trigger the sample and hold when I struck the pad hard enough to be up above that comparator's bass frequency. So I'm using a Lattice derivative module, and it's sitting in beside here, and it worked perfectly. I'm just coming out of the output that gives me a high trigger whenever it sees a positive change from the voltage coming in. So the lattice module that shoots out the envelope voltage for the drum also goes into that little lattice derivative module. It sees that high voltage spiking and then immediately gives me a high trigger that's capable of grabbing little sampled voltages from the quantizer, and then it lets me play melodies with drumsticks and have velocity control over it. So where is it getting these melodies from? It's pulling them from the Turing machine algorithm from the disting. So then if I'm playing along with the pluck sound, it's going to play the exact same melody that the pluck sound plays. And of course, if I reseed that disting using my negative voltage from the antenna, then I'll change the melody that the pluck sound is playing, and I'll get different melodies from the drum. So what's cool about this is it means that depending on when I play the drum, I'll get different pitches. But as long as I'm always playing the drum in exactly the same musically rhythmic spot that the sequence is playing, I'll get the same pitch. So I can derive and pull out different melodies from the melodic stream simply by changing the rhythms I'm playing with the drum. And if I repeat those rhythms, then I'll repeat those same melodies until I either change the rhythm or until I either reseed the Turing machine to create a different stream. So I'm just going to turn on our bass drum and our clap, and I'm going to see if I can get some repeating melodies just to demonstrate this effect. So you can hear how by repeating the same rhythm, I can get the same melodic content out of it. And that's a big part of this album that I'm working on. The other cool thing about this is that the drum will respond very, very well to regular kind of drumming. So if I do things that are a little bit quicker, like double stroke rolls and things, it'll actually respond to that. And then I'm sending it to some echo so that I can get a little bit of panning echo that repeats back kind of what I played through it, so I can get them to all sort of line up. So then the next thing that I got to thinking about is, since I'm running triggers to my Doepfer sample and hold to grab pitches that are coming out of the quantizer, like I often do in many of my patches, it occurred to me that if I soldered together a little sustain foot switch that basically took the shield and the hot connector from the wiring and then used that to close or open the circuit of triggers that go to that sample and hold, I could effectively create kind of like, not really a sustain switch, but a hold switch that holds the pitches, but not the envelope. So here I am with the foot switch undepressed in its regular mode. it'll follow the melodic content that I'm grabbing from the quantizer. But if I hold it, it's not sending any more triggers, and so it holds onto whatever the sample and hold last grabbed. And it'll slowly sink. That pitch will slowly drop in pitch as that capacitor discharges, but it'll hold it long enough that it's musically useful. So then it lets me play and hold and kind of change melodies as I go. So I'm stepping on this foot switch as I'm playing this patch. So I get pretty busy with all of this going on. There's all kinds of different things happening with two antennas. The drum, I'm wearing a microphone for the vocoder, so it definitely keeps me busy. So that's a kind of a quick look at everything that's happening in this case. Thanks again to my Patreons for supporting me to make it this far. I've made it halfway around the world, making wacky modular music. Thanks to Dr. Pinchbeck for putting together our artistic residency in Viljandi, Estonia. See you next time.